Yes, you right there, you can own a home someday and you can build wealth through real estate. That's exactly what I'm gonna show you in this video. And it's not magic, but it is gonna be the difference for you between renting and owning. My name is Joe Carmack, and before I moved to Minnesota, I grew up in Colorado with my mom, who was single, and my older brother. And I knew growing up that we were broke, but I didn't want to be when I was older. And so I was absolutely committed to figuring out whatever I had to do to build wealth and build the life that I wanted. So I started paying attention to what other seemingly smart people were doing, and that's what led me to real estate and eventually becoming a real estate agent. I've come to realize just how significant homeownership is to building the life that you want, and that's exactly what I'm gonna teach you today. First, I need to ask you a favor. For just the next few minutes, could you open your mind to what I'm saying? Consider that it might actually be possible and true for you, because I promise it is. Let's talk about renting. Now, renting is pretty straightforward. Obviously, someone else owns the home, you get to live there, and you pay them a monthly rent. You got to pay your own utilities. That'd be things like water, electricity, and gas, but then they hold all the other costs for maintaining that property. You've either agreed to rent the property for a certain length of time. Typically that's going to be a year, and that commitment is called a lease. I'm sure you're pretty smart and you already knew all of that, but let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's say someone else goes out, they purchase a home, they have to pay their mortgage payment. Let's say that mortgage payment is $1,200 a month. Someone comes in, then they rent that home. Let's say that's $1,700 a month. That means that landlord is going to be making about $500 per month on that rental income. That would be about $6,000 per year. And let's say they have about 50% expenses. That's gonna mean that landlord's gonna walk away with about $3,000 per year from you renting their home. There are some major benefits of renting a home. First of all, it's gonna be that it's a short-term commitment. It's only for a year, so if you wanna move somewhere else, you don't like the property, you can just move to something else after your lease is done. Second, obviously the landlord's gotta maintain the home, so you don't have the expense or the hassle of maintaining the property. And then third is gonna be that it doesn't require as much for cash or credit or income to just rent that property. Now let's talk about owning a home. And in a second, I'm gonna walk you through the process of how you actually buy a home, which is not as difficult as you might think. But for now, I want you to understand two main concepts. First of all, let's talk about appreciation. Now, what that means is anything that you purchase is going to either go up in value over time or it's going to go down in value. So cars, for example, are something that when you purchase it, it becomes worth less and less and less over time. So if it goes down in value, that's a depreciating asset. If it goes up in value, that's appreciating asset. So with a house, that is something that's going to go up in value over the long haul. All right, so let me show you what I'm talking about right here. So on our little graph here, the higher it is, obviously more valuable, bottom less valuable. On the bottom, we're starting with today, and then we're gonna progress 10 and 20 years down the road. So let's say you buy a house, and let's say you buy it right now for $200,000. Okay, that'll be the example that we'll use throughout today. So with that property, again, that's gonna be an appreciating asset, which means that it's gonna go up in value over time, okay? So this blue line here, that's gonna represent this property going up in value. It'll go up some years, down others, but overall, typically homes are gonna appreciate about 4% per year, okay? I'll write that here for you. And feel free, I would love for you to write this graph down because I want you to remember this. It's truly, truly huge in concept. So appreciation, assets are going up over time. And then the second thing you need to understand is called equity. Now here's what we're talking about. Let me, in red here, I'll use, this is gonna be the debt against the home. So we'll talk in a minute how much it costs to buy a house. But for now, let's say that you don't put any money down. You buy the home, it's worth $200,000, and your mortgage balance is $200,000, okay? So then the debt against it, you would have no equity built into the house. Here's what happens over time though. With that debt there, you're gonna be paying that down over time, and so then you're gonna owe less and less against the property, right? That mortgage balance will get lower and lower. And blue line's going up, that appreciation, you're gonna be earning 4% or so on average per year. Now, equity is going to be that spread that's in between there, okay? So let's say about 10 years from now, that home, I did the math for you, if it goes up on average about 4% per year appreciation, then in 10 years from now, that home is going to be worth about $300,000. Okay, so in 10 years, that $200,000 home will go up by $100,000. Also with your balance on your mortgage, if you're starting at $200,000, as you're paying that down over time, then all of a sudden that becomes $150,000 over 10 years. Now it's not a straight line graph, okay? You can see it's kind of that bell curve. But if you fast forward 10 years, you would have about $50,000 paid off on that mortgage. So our equity there, you guys are smart, you can do the math. $150,000 is your equity. Now here's really where the magic happens. Obviously that's great, but let's say you bought a really modest starter home, okay? It's probably not gonna be anything fancy. The townhouse I bought for my first home was a dump, but it was a great starter home. And then a few years later down the road, we'll say 10 years later, you're gonna go ahead and sell that asset, okay? You're gonna sell the home. Maybe you've got about $20,000 in closing costs. I'll just use some round numbers. That means you're gonna have about $130,000 after you sell that home, okay? You and I will get to the closing table, you'll sign on the dotted line, and they'll walk away they'll give you a check for $130,000. So if that right there doesn't convince you to buy a house, I don't know what will. But let's look back at renting. You didn't purchase an asset, you agreed to pay rent for a year, and then let's say you keep renewing that for 10 years, your rent payment will definitely have gone up over those 10 years, typically about the same amount, but your mortgage payment doesn't really go up very much. So then after those 10 years, you stop renting, you've got literally not a dime for your name. They're not going to give you a check for anything except for maybe your security deposit if you're lucky back after 10 years. Owning a home, you walk away with $130,000. But let's keep moving, okay? Let's say at that point you're wanting a little bit bigger and better house, right? So then let's say you're going to buy a home that is, let's say $400,000, okay? So then right here we'll say $400,000. That home again is going to appreciate about 4% per year, and it'll go up something like this over the following 10 years. You're gonna then have let's say you wanna take that 130,000. Let's say you wanna put some money into savings. Let's say you need to upgrade your car. You wanna do a little whatever with that. Beef up your emergency fund, pay off some debts, which you should always be paying off. So let's say you're gonna take 100,000 and put it down for your new house purchase. If you're buying at, that was 400,000 we said, you're going to have a mortgage balance then that is 300,000, okay? I'm gonna get a little jumbled here, but then your starting mortgage balance would be 300,000, okay? You're going to then start paying off that as well over the life of the loan. And then you can see right here, remember when you bought your first house, you bought it very little down, almost zero down. When you bought your second house, you've got $100,000 in equity that you're starting with right there, okay? We're starting with this nice big gap, and then that's only gonna get bigger and bigger over time, and you can see it grows exponentially. It's not just a straight line thing. So then, let's fast forward to 10 years more that you've owned that second home. So then, after about 20 years, here's what's gonna happen. I ran the numbers for you on here as well. $400,000 home, appreciated at 4% per year. It's gonna be just a touch under $600,000, okay? So then 20 years from now, you went from nothing to owning a home that's worth $600,000. And as you're paying off that debt, that would be about $230,000 left on your mortgage balance. So you guys are smart, you can do the math. That's $370,000 worth of equity that you've got after just 20 years. Mind-blowing, right? Okay, again, let's say you didn't buy a home, you decided you want to keep renting, you've got literally nothing to show for it after 20 years of renting. If you're watching this when you're 18, that would, 10 years down the road, you're 28 and you've got $130,000. You're 38, you've got $370,000. That is absolutely massive. Now, let me blow your mind a little bit. Let's say I ran the numbers for 30 years, and I want you to make a guess before I tell you, okay? Let's say with the second home, and you keep that home for 30 years, okay? That's typically the length of a mortgage. So in 30 years, you'll probably have your mortgage completely paid off, typically. And then if you're going up 4% per year, I want you to guess, write it down on your paper, how much do you think you're gonna have in equity if you sold that second home after owning it for 30 years? This is gonna blow your mind. You're gonna have $1.3 million in equity after owning that home for 30 years. If you're watching this and you're 18, 10 years plus 30, that's 40, you're 58 years old, and you're a millionaire just like that, literally only because you bought a house when you were young and you let the appreciation happen for you over time. All right, so that's all well and good, but how do you actually buy a house? Now let me walk you through the cost of buying a home and the steps you need to take in order to make that a reality for yourself. So we've got a home buying guide here. If you haven't already gotten a copy of this, I've got one digitally. My email's down below. Let me know and I'd be happy to send it to you. Or if your teacher has probably already sent this to you if you're watching it from school. All right, so let me walk you through this home buying process guide right here. First of all, we're starting with dreaming. That's literally where you're at right now. And that's the most important thing. You need to understand that it's absolutely possible for you to buy a house. Anyone can do it. It may take some time. It'll definitely take some hard work. You're gonna have to save. You're gonna have to make good choices, but you can definitely get there. Now, the first step you're always gonna wanna do, and you can't skip this step, is you need to talk to a real estate agent like myself. We can sit down with you. We can see what your situation is, how much money you got, what your income looks like, what your debts look like, and we can help get you ready, whether that's in 6 months, 6 weeks, or 6 years, it doesn't matter. We can make sure that you take the right steps to get there, and it costs you nothing. There's no strings attached. So find a great agent in your area. Make sure you schedule them for a buyer consult. The first thing they're gonna have you do after that is getting pre-approved. Now, when you wanna buy a home, assuming you don't have a couple $100,000 in cash, you're gonna wanna secure a loan for that purchase. Now, what gives the bank the ability to loan for that is a mortgage, and that mortgage document basically says if you don't make your payments, they get to take your house. So that's what a pre-approval is you going to the bank, you'll fill out a big loan application, and they will look through your finances, and they'll determine if you're eligible, if you meet the criteria for purchasing that home. Here's what's really important and you need to understand with getting pre-approved. First of all, this is why your credit score really, really matters. In today's market, typically we can see maybe a 600 or so credit score can get approved. I've heard of some down to 580. But what's important is the higher credit score you have, the better loan terms you're gonna get, the better interest rate, the better everything else. So keeping that credit score good is going to help you a ton. The second thing is you wanna make sure you don't have a ton of debt relative to your income. So if you don't make very much money and you got a ton of debt payments, you're never gonna qualify. So that's why it's super important. Don't take out that credit card debt, don't spend more money than you can afford, and make sure you get your income up. That's the third thing, is making sure that you've got a really good income. You don't need to be making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in order to buy a home. Typically, if you don't have a lot of debt, you can buy a home as low as like $40,000 income. More is better, but I want you to realize you don't have to be making tons and tons of money. That said, the more money you can save up for the purchase of your home, the better picture it's going to be for you financially, the less risk. If there's something that needs maintained with the home, you can absorb that. You can pay to replace the stove if it goes out or something like that. So I would definitely challenge you. Whatever you think you can make as far as an income, I want you to double it, and then I want you to shoot for that number. Maybe you won't get all the way there, but you'll get a lot more than where you think you can afford right now. So get your income up, save as much cash as you can, and then get that credit score to a really solid place. Now, as far as cash to close, everyone wants to know how much it costs to buy a house. We have programs available in Minnesota that you can buy a house sometimes as low as $1,000 just to get into the home. I don't want you to focus on how little you have to save to get into a home, but I would tell you to save up as much money as you possibly can for the purchase of that home, but also just an emergency fund, a rainy day fund, in case something should happen. I want you to be really, really stable financially and get more money in the bank, okay? But you can buy a house with as low as $1,000 down, or if you want to get a better down payment, that'll give you that more equity to start you with, right? That bigger gap in the green line like we talked before. And a typical minimum down payment would be 3% to 4%, something like that, okay? So those are good generic ballparks that I'd like you to shoot for so that you can get yourself pre-approved. Once you're ready to buy a house and you are pre-approved, that's when the fun stuff starts. So we'll take you out, we'll let you see a few different homes. I'm sure you've seen things online with agents showing clients around. I'll help you understand what you can afford, what your budget's gonna get you, which areas are gonna be able to get you the nicest home for the price that you've got to spend. And we'll then start making some offers. If it's in a really challenging market, we may need to make a few different offers until you get one accepted. Not a problem, just be prepared for that. And we'll do everything we can to make the strongest offers for those sellers. So once you've gotten your offer accepted, what happens from the time you get your offer accepted to when you close? Now, this is this green phase right here. First thing is gonna be your inspection. Now, as you can see from my little dollar signs here, that's gonna be the first time that you'll pay any money out of your pocket for anything through this whole process, including pre-approval. With that, you're gonna have your earnest money that's due up front. I'll coach you through that amount. Typically, it's about $1,000 or up to 1%. And then we'll get your inspections done. Your agent will take care of all of that for you. But typically in Minnesota right now, I'm seeing that cost be between $500 and $800 to get your inspections done. Now, that's something that you'll have to pay for. That's the one expense that you're not gonna get back during this time frame because of course you gotta pay that inspector. After we get through the inspection period, then to be honest, it's a bunch of boring things that happen behind the scenes for you. But that's called the underwriting period, and that's when they're working on transferring everything from the seller's name into your name as the buyer. So once that's all ready, again, about 30 to 45 days later, then we will have that closing. Closing is basically the fancy word for a big meeting where we all sit down and they've got a whole stack of documents for you to sign. Once you've signed all of them and you've brought your cash to close, then they will give you the keys to the property. So again, how much is going to be due at that final closing? It can really depend on a lot of different things, but minimum of $1,000 or up to about 7% of the purchase price is a pretty good range that you can expect to be within. So there you go. I hope you understand a little more about the process of buying a home, and most importantly, the value of owning a home versus renting. I am cheering for you. I wish you the best so much. It's absolutely possible for you to become a millionaire, and I'll see you next time.